The moment my parents walked into my grandmother's old house with a realtor, expecting to bully me into signing it away, I stayed silent. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just stepped aside. Because sitting on the living room couch, calm as ever, was the one man they despised the most. Daniel Ruiz, the investor they swore they'd never deal with. My mother's face went pale. My father nearly dropped. His briefcase and my sister Vanessa froze in disbelief. That was the moment they realized. The house was no longer mine to surrender. I had already sold it, and the future they tried to steal from me had slipped forever out of their control. But I should start from the beginning. My name is Emily Carter, and I was always the forgotten daughter. Not dramatically neglected or abused. Nothing that obvious or cinematic. Just quietly overlooked in favor of my younger sister Vanessa. She was the delicate one, the special one who needed extra attention, extra resources, extra everything. Meanwhile, I was the strong one, which really meant I was expected to understand why I got less. Less celebration, less support, less love. Our childhood home in Austin was nice enough. A comfortable suburban house with a big backyard where my father, Thomas, hosted his famous barbecues for colleagues and friends. My mother, Catherine, maintained an immaculate interior and a carefully curated social calendar. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Successful father in real estate, elegant stay-at-home mother, and 2 daughters who supposedly wanted for nothing. But inside those walls, the pattern was clear. Vanessa's artwork covered the refrigerator, while mine was filed away. Vanessa got private tennis lessons. I was told to join the free community center programs. When I earned a full academic scholarship to UT Austin, studying nights and weekends for years, my parents hosted a modest dinner. When Vanessa got accepted to the same university 2 years later, with no scholarship, they threw her a party with 50 guests and hired a photographer. Emily doesn't need as much, my mother would explain to relatives who occasionally noticed the disparity. She's always been independent, so capable. Vanessa is more sensitive. She requires extra support. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother Eleanor, Mom's mother. She lived in a beautiful old, Victorian-style home in central Austin, a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. While my parents were busy with Vanessa's ballet recitals and social events, I would escape to Grandma Eleanor's house on weekends. "You have something special, Emily," she would tell me as we baked cookies in her vintage kitchen or weeded her garden of native Texas wildflowers. A quiet strength that comes from within, not from others' approval. When I complained about my parents' favoritism, she never dismissed my feelings or made excuses for them. Instead, she would cup my face in her weathered hands and say, "One day, Emily, you'll see the difference between people who love you for what you give them and people who love you for who you are." I believed her, and those weekends at her house became my sanctuary. The house itself seemed to embrace me. Creaking wooden floors that had known a century of footsteps, stained glass windows that transformed sunlight into rainbow patterns across the walls, and a wraparound porch where we would sit in rocking chairs, drinking sweet tea and talking about books, dreams, and life. After college, I got a job as a marketing coordinator at a local tech company. I rented a small but comfortable apartment, bought a used car, and started building my own life. I wasn't wealthy, but I was independent and proud of it. Vanessa, meanwhile, moved into a luxury apartment paid for by our parents, while she found herself between jobs. Then last fall, Grandma Eleanor passed away in her sleep at 87. The funeral was elegant and well-attended. She had been beloved in the community. I stood beside my mother, father, and sister as people offered condolences, but inside I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away the best parts of me. Grandma was gone, and with her, the only unconditional love I'd ever known. 2 weeks after the funeral, our family gathered at our parents' house for the reading of the will with Grandma's attorney, a kind but formal man named Mr. Hoffman. My parents sat together on their leather sofa, confident and relaxed. Vanessa perched on an armchair, scrolling through her phone. I sat stiffly in a dining chair pulled into the living room, feeling like the odd one out as usual. Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Eleanor Carter made specific distributions that I'll now share with you." He listed several charitable donations, gifts to old friends, and a generous amount to her church. My parents nodded approvingly at each item. "To my son-in-law Thomas Carter, I leave my collection of first edition Texas history books, which he has always admired." My father smiled, pleased. "To my daughter Catherine Carter, I leave my jewelry collection and personal effects to be, distributed as she sees fit." My mother touched her pearl necklace, one of Grandma's that she had already claimed, and nodded. To my granddaughter, Vanessa Carter, I leave the sum of $25,000 to further her education or career ambitions. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, her expression a mix of surprise and disappointment. She had expected more. And finally, Mr. Hoffman continued, to my granddaughter, Emily Carter, I leave my home at 1842 Magnolia Street, including all furnishings, the property on which it stands, and an additional sum of $10,000 for maintenance. The room went silent. My parents stared at Mr. Hoffman in disbelief. Vanessa's mouth fell open. I felt like I couldn't breathe. There must be some mistake, my mother finally said, her voice tight. Mr. Hoffman shook his head. No mistake, Mrs. Carter. Your mother was very clear about her wishes. He handed me a sealed envelope. Emily, your grandmother asked that I give you this privately. I took it with trembling hands as my father started to argue with Mr. Hoffman, demanding explanations. But I wasn't listening anymore. I quietly stood up and walked out to my car where I opened the envelope with tears blurring my vision. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I've moved on to what comes next, but I hope my home will give you what it gave me: sanctuary, peace, and a foundation to build the life you deserve. This house has witnessed both joy and sorrow, and its walls hold more wisdom than any of us. I've left it to you because you understand its value beyond money. You know it's not just wood and plaster, but a piece of our history and I hope your future. I know your parents will be upset. They've always seen the house as an investment, not a home. But remember what I taught you. Real wealth isn't what you own. It's knowing who you are. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. 3 days after the will reading, my mother called. I knew what was coming, but I still wasn't prepared for the coldness in her voice. Emily, we need to discuss the house, she said without preamble. Your father and I think the fair thing is for you to sell it and split the proceeds with Vanessa. I sat down on my apartment's worn sofa, clutching the phone. Mom, Grandma left the house to me specifically. She wanted me to have it. Don't be selfish, she replied sharply. It's a valuable property in central Austin, worth at least $600,000. You already have a place to live and a job. Vanessa needs to establish herself properly. By establish herself, you mean buy a luxury condo downtown? I asked quietly. My mother ignored my question. We're family, Emily. Family shares. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. That night, I drove to the house. My house now. I unlocked the door and walked through the quiet rooms, running my fingers over the antique furniture, the spines of books in the study, the well-worn countertops in the kitchen. Each room held memories. Grandma teaching me to make her famous peach cobbler, reading Jane Austen novels aloud on rainy afternoons, sitting in companionable silence as we worked on crossword puzzles together. I knew then that I couldn't sell it, not just because it was mine legally, but because it was the only place where I had ever truly felt valued. The next morning, my father called. Emily, be reasonable, he said in his business voice, the one he used to close deals. You don't need a 3-bedroom house. It's too big for you to maintain, and the property taxes alone will eat up your savings. I've done the math, Dad. I can afford it. That's not the point, he insisted. The point is that your sister has an opportunity to buy into that new development downtown, the Monarch. It would be perfect for her, but she needs more capital. So you're asking me to give up my inheritance so Vanessa can have a luxury condo? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. I'm asking you to think about what's best for the family, he replied, his tone hardening. Stop acting entitled. It's just a free gift you got, nothing you earned. I took a deep breath. Grandma didn't think it was nothing, Dad. She wanted me to have her home. He sighed heavily. We're meeting with a realtor tomorrow. I expect you to be reasonable when we discuss listing the property. The calls kept coming over the next week. Vanessa texted about how unfair it was that I got the house while she only received money. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions about what I should do with my inheritance. Even my mother's friends contacted me, telling me how disappointed my grandmother would be to see family conflict over her legacy. The pressure was relentless, but each attempt to make me cave only strengthened my resolve. I remembered Grandma's words. Real wealth isn't what you own. It's knowing who you are. And I knew who I was. Someone who wouldn't be bullied, even by her own family. 2 weeks after the will reading, my parents escalated. They arrived at my apartment unannounced one evening, with Vanessa in tow. "We've found a buyer," my father announced as they pushed past me into my living room. "I haven't agreed to sell," I replied, crossing my arms. "Don't be difficult, Emily," my mother snapped. "The market won't stay hot forever. We need to move quickly." Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes wide with practiced innocence. Please. The Monarch only has 3 units left. If I miss this opportunity, I'll never get another chance at a place like this." I looked at my family, these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but who had always made that love conditional on my compliance, my silence, my willingness to take less so Vanessa could have more. "The house is mine," I said quietly, but firmly. "Grandma left it to me, and I'm not selling." My father's face darkened. "We've scheduled a meeting with our realtor tomorrow at the house. Be there at noon, or there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I asked, though I already knew. He straightened his tie, a gesture he made when delivering ultimatums to business associates. "Either you agree to sell the house and split the money, or you're no longer part of this family." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I looked at my mother, hoping for some softening, some recognition of the cruelty of this threat, but her face remained impassive. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said finally, opening my door to indicate they should leave. After they'd gone, I sat alone in my apartment, turning the situation over in my mind. I wasn't going to sell, that much I knew, but I also wasn't naive enough to think my parents would simply accept my decision and move on. They would keep pushing, keep manipulating, keep trying to wear me down. I needed a solution, one that would protect both me and the house Grandma had entrusted to me. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. The next morning, I called Daniel Ruiz. We'd been in several business classes together at UT Austin, and though we hadn't been close friends, I'd always respected his intelligence and integrity. After graduation, he'd built a successful investment firm focusing on historic properties in Austin. More importantly, I knew my parents despised him. Years ago, he'd refused to invest in one of my father's development projects, calling it environmentally irresponsible and community unfriendly. My mother had never forgiven him for what she saw as a public humiliation. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Emily Carter," he said, sounding pleasantly surprised. "It's been a while. I need your help," I told him and explained my situation. An hour later, we met at a coffee shop near his office. Daniel listened without interrupting as I laid out the full story, including my family's ultimatum. "So you want to sell the house to me?" he asked when I finished. "Yes, but with conditions," I replied. "First, the sale has to happen immediately, today, if possible. Second, it needs to remain confidential until I say otherwise. And third," I took a deep breath, "I want a leaseback agreement that gives me the right to live in the upper floor and eventually buy back the property." Daniel studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Your family won't be happy. They're already unhappy," I said with a small, sad smile. "The question is whether they get to control my life because of it." He nodded slowly. "I've been looking for a satellite office space for my firm. The location is perfect, and I've always admired that Victorian. I can make this work, Emily, at above market value." By that evening, we had signed the papers. The house was officially sold to Ruiz Historic Investments, with a confidentiality clause that prevented either party from disclosing the details until both agreed. I had a 20-year lease on the upper floor with first right to repurchase if Daniel ever decided to sell. It wasn't what I had initially wanted, but it was the best solution to an impossible situation. And as I signed my name on the final document, I felt a strange sense of peace. Grandma Eleanor had given me more than a house. She had given me the courage to stand up for myself, even against my own family. The next day, I waited at the house for my parents' scheduled realtor meeting at noon, knowing what was about to unfold. Daniel arrived at 11:30, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, and took a seat on the living room couch, the very spot where my grandmother used to sit. At exactly 12, I heard the sound of my parents' Mercedes in the driveway. The moment of truth had arrived. The doorbell rang at precisely noon, its chime echoing through the high-ceilinged foyer. I took a steadying breath, smoothed my cotton blouse, and walked deliberately to the door. Standing on Grandma Eleanor's wraparound porch were exactly the people I expected. My mother in her designer pantsuit, my father clutching his leather portfolio, my sister Vanessa scrolling through her phone, and a woman I didn't recognize who could only be the realtor, perfectly coiffed with an eager smile that faltered slightly when she saw my expression. "Emily, good, you're here," my father said briskly, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. "This is Jessica Winters from Elite Austin Properties. She's prepared comps and has several interested buyers already. I stood my ground in the doorway, not moving aside. Before we begin, I need to make something clear. I haven't agreed to sell this house. My mother's smile tightened. Emily, we've been through this. It's time to be reasonable. We're just going to look around. Vanessa chimed in, finally, glancing up from her phone. The monarch needs my deposit by the end of the week. I looked at each of them. These people who shared my blood, but who had never truly shared my life. I saw the entitlement in their expressions, the absolute certainty that I would eventually bend to their will as I always had. But not this time. Come in, I said quietly, stepping aside. There's someone I'd like you to meet. As they filed past me into the foyer, I watched their expressions. My mother immediately began assessing the antique mirror that hung over the entry table, probably mentally calculating its value. My father was already talking to the realtor about comparable properties in the neighborhood. Vanessa was taking selfies against the backdrop of the stained glass window in the stairwell. This way, I said, leading them toward the living room. I think it's best if we all sit down for this conversation. The moment we entered the living room, the atmosphere changed. Daniel Ruiz rose smoothly from the velvet couch, my grandmother's favorite piece of furniture, where she had read to me, comforted me, and finally taught me to stand up for myself. Catherine Thomas. Daniel nodded politely. It's been a while. The shock on my parents' faces was instant and complete. My mother froze mid-step, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. My father's jaw tightened visibly, a muscle pulsing in his temple. What is he doing here? My mother asked coldly, her eyes fixed on me. Vanessa, who had been trailing behind, nearly bumped into our mother. When she saw Daniel, she paled. I remembered then that Daniel's firm had recently become a major client of the marketing agency where Vanessa was hoping to land a job. Mr. Ruiz, I don't understand your presence at this private family meeting, my father said, his voice strained with forced professionalism. Daniel remained perfectly composed. Actually, Thomas, I'm here in a professional capacity. He nodded toward me. Emily, would you like to, explain, or should I? I stepped forward, feeling strangely calm despite the tension crackling in the air. Mom, Dad, Vanessa, Ms. Winters, I wanted you all here to avoid any misunderstandings. The house is no longer mine to sell. What are you talking about? My father demanded. I met his gaze steadily. I sold it. Yesterday. To Daniel. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hall, counting out the seconds of their shock. That's impossible, my mother finally said. You couldn't have. It was all completely legal, Daniel interjected smoothly, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. I'd be happy to show you the paperwork. The transaction is complete, and I am now the legal owner of 1842 Magnolia Street. My father's face flushed deep red. This is outrageous. You've been manipulated, Emily. We'll contest this. On what grounds? I asked calmly. The house was mine to sell, and I sold it at above market value to a qualified buyer. There was no coercion, no fraud. The realtor, Jessica Winters, shifted uncomfortably. I think I should excuse myself from this situation. She edged toward the door, clearly, recognizing she wouldn't be earning a commission today. My mother turned on me, her composure finally cracking. How could you do this to your own family, to your sister? The same way you've been doing things to me my whole life, I replied softly, by making a choice that serves my interests, rather than yours. Vanessa stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes, the same tears she had weaponized since childhood whenever she didn't get her way. Emily, how could you? You know how much I wanted that condo. Now what am I supposed to do? I looked at my sister, beautiful, pampered Vanessa who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the familiar urge to smooth things over, to sacrifice my needs for hers. But then I remembered Grandma. Eleanor's words about recognizing the difference between people who love you for what you give them and people who love you for who you are. You'll do what I've always done, Vanessa, I said gently. You'll figure it out on your own. My father turned to Daniel, his businessman mask sliding back into place. Name your price, Ruiz. Whatever you paid her, I'll beat it by 10%. Daniel shook his head. Not for sale, Thomas. I've been looking for a satellite office location in this neighborhood for months. This property is perfect for my needs. Office location? My mother repeated faintly. You're turning Eleanor's home into an office? The first floor, yes, Daniel confirmed. It will be renovated to accommodate my expanding financial advising division. He paused, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In fact, I believe it's the division that recently partnered with Austin Media Partners. Your employer, isn't it, Vanessa? Vanessa's eyes widened in horror as the implications sank in. Austin Media Partners was the agency where she had been desperately trying to advance beyond her entry-level position. If Daniel's firm became a major client, he would have significant influence over her professional future. You planned this, my father accused, looking from Daniel to me. This was deliberate. No, I corrected him. This was a business decision. Something you taught me to respect above all else, Dad. Mr. Ruiz needed a property. I needed a solution that preserved Grandma Eleanor's legacy while protecting my independence. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. And what about your sister's needs? My mother demanded. I sighed. That's the thing, Mom. Vanessa's wants have never been my responsibility, no matter how often you've tried to make them so. The doorbell rang again, and I excused myself to answer it. On the porch stood Mrs. Delgado, Grandma Eleanor's next-door neighbor for 40 years, and behind her, several other neighbors I recognized from childhood visits. Emily, dear, Mrs. Delgado said, peering past me. Is everything all right? We saw so many cars arrive, and Thomas seemed quite agitated when he arrived. Before I could answer, my father stormed into the foyer, my mother and Vanessa trailing behind him. The neighbors watched with undisguised interest as my family's private drama suddenly became very public. This isn't over, my father said tightly. We'll be speaking with our attorney. You're welcome to do that, Daniel replied, appearing behind me. But I think you'll find everything is in order. My mother looked from Daniel to the gathered neighbors, clearly calculating the social cost of making a scene. Her reputation in this historic neighborhood had always mattered to her more than almost anything. Catherine, Thomas, Mrs. Delgado nodded politely. It's been some time since we've seen you here. Not since poor Eleanor's funeral, I believe. My mother forced a tight smile. We were just leaving Margaret. Family business. Of course, Mrs. Delgado murmured, though her knowing gaze shifted between my parents and Daniel. Emily, don't forget our garden club meets Tuesday. Your grandmother would be so pleased to have you join us. As my parents and Vanessa pushed past the neighbors and stalked to their car, I felt a strange lightness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing after them, trying to smooth things over or make peace. I was standing my ground, in the doorway of a house that had sheltered generations of my family and would now shelter me, just as Grandma Eleanor had intended. The fallout was swift and predictable. By that evening, my phone was flooded with messages from extended family members, my parents' friends, and even distant acquaintances, all expressing their concern and disappointment over my hasty decision. My Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister, called to lecture me about family loyalty. My cousin Marcus texted to say I'd always been the difficult one. Even my father's golfing buddy Richard, whom I'd met exactly twice, felt entitled to email me about the pain I was causing my parents. I silenced my phone and sat on Grandma Eleanor's porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Austin sky in shades of orange and purple. The old Victorian house creaked and settled around me, its familiar sounds a comfort in the midst of the storm I'd unleashed. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry, not from regret, but from relief and grief, and the strange, painful freedom of finally breaking free from expectations that had never truly been fair. The next morning, I returned to work at my marketing job, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But by lunchtime, word had somehow reached my office about my family situation. My coworker Jenna cornered me in the break room, eyes wide with curiosity. Is it true your grandmother left you a fortune and you sold it to spite your family? She asked, not bothering with preamble. I sighed. No, Jenna. My grandmother left me her house, my parents tried to force me to sell it so my sister could buy a luxury condo, and I made a decision that protected my inheritance. Jenna looked disappointed by this less dramatic version of events. But I heard your sister is devastated. I'm sure she is, I replied, stirring my coffee. Vanessa isn't used to not getting exactly what she wants. By the end of the day, my boss, Michael, called me into his office. He closed the door behind me, his expression serious. Emily, I've received a call from Thomas Carter at Carter Real Estate. He paused, studying my reaction. He mentioned you're having a family disagreement. He seemed to imply it might affect your work performance. I felt a cold wave of anger wash over me. My father was actually trying to sabotage my job. And what did you tell him? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Michael leaned back in his chair. I told him that you're one of our most reliable team members and that your personal life has never affected your professional performance. He smiled slightly. I also mentioned that we don't appreciate outside interference in our personnel matters. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Michael. He nodded. Look, I don't know what's going on with your family, and frankly, it's none of my business. But if you need time off or any other accommodations, just let me know. That small act of professional respect nearly broke me. I'd become so accustomed to being undermined, to having my boundaries ignored, that simple decency felt overwhelming. Over the next week, I moved my belongings from my apartment to the upper floor of Grandma's house, my house now, at least partially. Daniel had been true to his word. Renovation. Plans for the first floor were already underway, but he'd ensured the upper floor remained untouched, preserving the bedrooms, bathroom, and small sitting area that had always been my favorite part of the house. As I unpacked my clothes into Grandma Eleanor's cedar wardrobe, I found a small jewelry box tucked in the back corner. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny key. A note in my grandmother's handwriting read, "For Emily, the key to your future is always in your own hands." I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, feeling her presence around me like a protective embrace. That night, I slept in my new bedroom, the same room where I'd stayed during countless childhood visits, and dreamed of Grandma Eleanor telling me she was proud. The renovations began the following Monday. Daniel's crew worked efficiently, transforming the downstairs parlor, dining room, and study into elegant office spaces while preserving the historic character of the house. I would come home from work to find carpenters carefully restoring the original crown molding, or electricians updating the wiring, while taking pains not to damage the vintage wallpaper. Daniel himself stopped by regularly to check on progress. One evening, about 3 weeks after the confrontation with my family, he brought takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and we ate on the porch, discussing the renovation plans. The project manager says they'll be finished with the first phase by the end of next month, he told me, opening a container of pad thai. We're keeping as many original features as possible. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. Grandma would have hated to see her home gutted and modernized beyond recognition. Daniel nodded, studying me thoughtfully. Have you heard from your family? I shook my head. Radio silence, though apparently they've been telling everyone who'll listen that you manipulated me and that I've betrayed the family. Does that bother you? He asked. I considered the question, watching a hummingbird hover near Grandma's feeder. Less than I thought it would, I admitted. It's clarifying, in a way. They're not angry because they miss me or because they value our relationship. They're angry because I didn't comply, because I disrupted their plans. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You know, I've always respected your grandmother. I met her a few times through community preservation events. She was formidable, kind but absolutely unwilling to be steamrolled. I smiled at the accurate description. That was Grandma Eleanor. She taught me to stand up for myself, but it took me a long time to apply that lesson to my own family. Better late than never, Daniel said, raising his water glass in a small toast. As the weeks passed, I settled into a new routine. Work during the day, evenings spent reading on the porch or helping Mrs. Delgado with her garden next door. I joined the neighborhood garden club, just as Grandma Eleanor had always wanted me to, and found unexpected comfort in the company of older women who had known my grandmother and who treated me with warm respect. One Tuesday evening in June, I arrived home to find an unfamiliar car parked outside my house. As I approached cautiously, the driver's door opened and Vanessa stepped out, looking uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a plain blouse, far from her usual designer attire. "Emily," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded toward the porch. "We can sit outside." We settled into the rocking chairs, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. Vanessa had never visited me here without our parents, and she looked out of place, fidgeting with her phone case. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here," she finally said. "They'd be furious." "Why are you here then?" I asked, not unkindly. Vanessa sighed, looking out at the street. "I got the job at Austin Media Partners, full-time, not just freelance." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely happy for her despite everything. "That's what you wanted, right?" She nodded, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "The ironic part? My first major assignment is to work with our newest client, Ruiz Historic Investments. I'll be handling their branding for the new satellite office." She gestured toward the house. This office. The coincidence was so perfect, it was almost painful. "How do Mom and Dad feel about that?" They don't know yet, Vanessa admitted. I haven't told them. Dad's been difficult since everything happened. He tried to challenge the sale legally, but his attorney told him there was no case. I wasn't surprised. Daniel would have ensured every aspect of our transaction was airtight. So, I prompted when she fell silent again. Is that why you're here? To tell me about the job? Vanessa looked down at her hands. Partly, and partly to say, she hesitated, seeming to struggle with the words. To say I'm sorry. Not for wanting the condo, I did want it, but for expecting you to give up your inheritance to make it happen. I stared at my sister, searching her face for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Vanessa had never apologized to me. Not when she borrowed my prom dress and returned it stained. Not when she told my college boyfriend I'd cheated on him because she thought he deserved someone better. Not during all the years she'd watched our parents favor her without ever once acknowledging the inequality. That's unexpected, I finally said, unsure how to respond to this new, seemingly contrite version of my sister. Vanessa shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I've had some time to think. She gestured toward the house. And seeing Daniel's plans for this place, they're actually really beautiful, Emily. They're preserving all the important historical elements while making it functional. It's not at all what Mom and Dad made it sound like. How did they make it sound? Like you'd sold our family. Heritage to someone who was going to destroy it, she admitted. Dad keeps saying Daniel will gut it and flip it once the zoning changes go through. I shook my head. That's not what's happening. Daniel believes in historic preservation. It's central to his business model. And I have a long-term lease on the upper floor with first right to purchase if he ever sells. Vanessa looked surprised. They didn't mention that part. I'm not surprised, I said dryly. A silence fell between us, filled only by the gentle creak of the rocking chairs and the evening chorus of cicadas in the trees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the porch, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like one of those peaceful evenings from childhood when Vanessa and I would sit with Grandma Eleanor, drinking lemonade and listening to her stories about growing up in Austin during the 1950s. Do you remember, Vanessa said suddenly, when Grandma used to make us those fancy tea parties with the little sandwiches cut into shapes? I smiled despite myself, and she'd let us use the real silver teapot even though Mom would have had a fit if she knew. She always treated us the same, Vanessa said quietly, an edge of realization in her voice. Grandma, she never favored one of us over the other. The observation hung in the air between us, laden with all its unspoken implications. I watched my sister's face, wondering if she was finally seeing the patterns that had shaped our relationship from childhood, the constant competition created by our parents' uneven treatment. Why do you think she left the house to me? I asked, genuinely curious about Vanessa's perspective. She considered this, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache for the sister I might have had in a different family dynamic. Because you were the one who actually spent time with her, she said finally. I was always busy with, whatever seemed important at the time. Dance lessons, friends, social stuff. She paused. And maybe because she knew I would always have Mom and Dad's support. But you needed something of your own. The insight surprised me. It was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from Vanessa. Working with Daniel's team has been eye-opening, she continued. They respect me for my actual skills, not because of who our father is or what connections I have. It's terrifying, but also refreshing. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It's how I've lived my entire adult life, Vanessa, being judged on my own merits. I'm learning, she said with a small smile. Late, but learning. The porch light came on automatically as darkness fell, bathing us in a warm yellow glow. In this light, I could see the shadows under Vanessa's eyes, the slight droop in her usually perfect posture. She looked tired, not the dramatic, attention-seeking exhaustion she sometimes performed for our parents, but genuinely worn down. How are things at home? I asked, realizing I was actually concerned about her. Vanessa sighed heavily. Tense. Dad's obsessed with finding ways to challenge the sale. Mom keeps crying about family legacy and how you've destroyed it. They talk about you like you're a villain in some soap opera. And how do you feel about me? I asked directly. She met my eyes, perhaps for the first time that evening. Confused. Angry sometimes. But also, impressed. You stood up to them in a way I never could. Never even considered. It wasn't easy, I admitted. I can imagine, she said, then laughed softly. Actually, I can't imagine. That's the problem. Before I could respond, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, spotted us on the porch, and hesitated visibly, clearly unsure whether he should interrupt what appeared to be a family moment. It's okay, I called to him. We're just talking. He approached cautiously. Vanessa, good to see you. I hear you'll be working on our account. Vanessa straightened, shifting instantly into professional mode. Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to it. Call me Daniel, please. We're going to be working closely together. He smiled, then turned to me. I just stopped by to let you know the contractors found some original blueprints behind a loose board in the pantry. Thought you might want to take a look before we file them with the Historical Society. I would, thanks, I said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Vanessa stood abruptly. I should go. It's getting late. You don't have to leave on my account, Daniel said politely. No, I really should get back. Mom will start calling if I'm not home by 9. The eye roll that accompanied this statement made her suddenly look like a teenager again, reminding me that at 25, Vanessa was still finding her independence in ways I had established years ago. I walked her to her car, where she paused with her hand on the door. Emily, one more thing. The condo at the Monarch. I let it go. Told Dad I'd rather save for something I can afford on my own. My eyebrows rose in surprise. How did he take that? Not well, she admitted with a grimace. But it felt right. On impulse, I hugged her, our first genuine embrace in years. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, hugging me back awkwardly. You can visit again, I told her. Without Mom and Dad, if you want to. She nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. I'd like that. I watched her drive away, a complicated mixture of emotions swirling in my chest. Hope, skepticism, a fragile tenderness for this sister who had been both my rival and my constant shadow. Was this a genuine turning point, or just another manipulation? Only time would tell. Inside, Daniel had spread the old blueprints on the dining room table, soon to become a conference table in the renovated office. They were delicate and yellowed with age, covered in elegant handwritten notes from the original. Architect. These are amazing, I breathed, carefully examining the detailed drawings of the house as it had been conceived in 1897. They're a significant historical find, Daniel agreed. The Historical Society will be thrilled. But I thought you should see them first, since this is your family's legacy. I looked up at him, struck by his consideration. Thank you. For this and for everything, really. I know our arrangement was business, but you've been incredibly respectful of the house and its history. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. It's not just business, Emily. I meant what I said about admiring your grandmother. She was a force for preservation in this community, when developers like your father were trying to tear down everything old to build shiny new condos. Is that why you rejected his development project years ago? I asked, suddenly curious about the history that had made my parents despise this man. Daniel's expression turned serious. Your father wanted to demolish an entire block of historic homes to build luxury apartments, homes that had been in families for generations. I couldn't be part of that. I nodded, understanding better now. Why Grandma Eleanor had always spoken of Daniel with respect. They had shared values that my parents did not. Will you tell me more about your plans for the office? I asked, genuinely interested. Vanessa mentioned they're preserving the historical elements. Daniel's face lit up as he began describing his vision for the space, a combination of restoration and careful modernization that would honor the home's past while serving its future purpose. As he talked, pointing out features on the blueprints, I found myself drawn not just to the plans, but to the passion behind them. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peaceful certainty. This house, Grandma Eleanor's sanctuary and now mine, was in good hands. And perhaps, in standing up for myself, I had not just protected a physical inheritance, but opened the door to new possibilities I couldn't yet fully imagine. July arrived with a relentless Texas heat that seemed to shimmer in visible waves above the pavement. Inside my grandmother's house, my house, the old-fashioned ceiling fans spun lazily, supplementing the carefully installed central air conditioning that had been Daniel's first priority in the renovation. The workers had finished most of the downstairs transformation, and Daniel's employees would begin moving in next week. I had settled comfortably into the upstairs apartment, making it my own while preserving touches of Grandma Eleanor throughout. Her quilts draped over my modern sofa, her watercolor paintings hanging alongside my travel photographs. The blend of old and new felt right, a physical manifestation of how I was carrying her legacy forward while crafting my own path. Vanessa had visited 3 more times since our porch conversation. Each visit grew less awkward, our interactions gradually thawing from polite distance to something approaching genuine sisterhood. She'd even helped me plant a butterfly garden in the backyard, getting dirt under her manicured nails without a single complaint. It was a small thing, perhaps, but significant for a sister who had once refused to help me carry groceries because it might ruin her blowout. I still hadn't spoken to my parents. They had called several times in the weeks following the confrontation, but their voicemails had been full of recriminations and demands rather than apologies or understanding. After the third such message, my father threatening to contest the will based on undue influence from my grandmother, I had blocked their numbers, needing space to heal without their constant attacks. But Austin is a small city in many ways, especially within certain social circles. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever, and on a sweltering Thursday afternoon, the inevitable finally happened. I was having lunch with my colleague Jenna at a new bistro downtown when I spotted them across the restaurant. My parents seated with another couple I recognized as longtime friends of theirs. My father was gesturing emphatically, likely in the middle of one of his business anecdotes, while my mother nodded along with practiced interest. "Emily? What's wrong?" Jenna asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "My parents are here," I said quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on my plate, table by the window. Jenna resisted the urge to turn and look, showing unusual restraint. "Do you want to leave?" I considered it, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied thoughts of my family. But something in me rebelled against the idea of skulking out like I had something to be ashamed of. "No," I said, firmly. "I'm enjoying my lunch. I'm not going to let their presence change that." We continued our meal, and I managed to relax somewhat as Jenna regaled me with stories about her latest dating disasters. But as we were waiting for the check, I felt a shift in the air, that peculiar awareness of being watched. I glanced up to find my mother standing beside our table, her Chanel purse clutched tightly against her side. "Emily," she said, her voice cool, but not openly hostile. "What a surprise." "Hello, Mother," I replied evenly. "This is my friend Jenna from work." "Jenna, this is my mother, Catherine Carter." My mother barely acknowledged the introduction with a tight nod. "You're looking well." "Thank you, so are you." An awkward silence fell. Across the restaurant, I could see my father watching us intently, his expression unreadable from this distance. "Your father and I are having lunch with the Hendersons," my mother finally said, as if I'd asked. "Charles just made partner at his law firm." "Congratulations to him," I said politely, recognizing this for what it was, my mother's way of signaling that their social standing remained intact despite the family scandal. Another silence, heavier this time. I could see Jenna shifting uncomfortably in her seat, unsure whether to excuse herself. "Vanessa tells me she's been to visit you," my mother said abruptly. "Yes, several times. She mentioned the renovations are nearly complete." I nodded. "The first floor will be fully operational as office space next week. The historical integrity has been completely preserved." Something flickered across my mother's face. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant approval. "That's good to hear. Your grandmother would have wanted that." "Yes, she would," I agreed, momentarily united with my mother in our shared memory of Grandma Eleanor. "Well," my mother said, clearly struggling with what to say next, "I should get back to our table." "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "Your father has dropped his inquiries with the attorney about the house." It was the closest thing to an olive branch she could offer, I realized. "I'm glad to hear that." She nodded once, then turned and walked back to their table with the perfect posture she had maintained since her debutante days. I watched as she said something to my father, who glanced my way with a frown before, deliberately turning his attention back to the Hendersons. "Holy tension, Batman," Jenna breathed once my mother was out of earshot. "Is it always like that with your family?" I smiled wryly. Actually, that was downright cordial by recent standards. The encounter left me thoughtful. There had been no reconciliation, no dramatic apologies or tearful embraces, but there had been something. A tiny crack in the wall of estrangement, a first tentative step toward some new form of relationship. I wasn't sure what shape that relationship might take, or whether I even wanted one beyond the most basic civility. But the possibility existed now where before, there had been only rupture. That evening, I mentioned the encounter to Daniel when he stopped by to show me the final furniture selections for The office lobby. We were sitting on the porch swing, reviewing fabric samples in the golden light of sunset. "So they've stopped trying to challenge the sale?" he asked, setting aside a leather swatch. "Apparently," I nodded, "though I doubt they've stopped resenting it." Daniel smiled. "Probably not. But it's progress." I looked out at the street, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. I keep wondering if I did the right thing. Not about keeping the house, I know that was right, but selling it to you, making such a definitive break with my family. Do you regret it? I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "But I wonder if there could have been a less dramatic solution." Daniel shook his head. "In my experience, some people only understand clear boundaries. Your parents spent a lifetime expecting you to accommodate their wishes. Gentle pushback wouldn't have registered." "You're probably right," I sighed. "I just never imagined my inheritance would become this catalytic event that would transform all my relationships." "Isn't that what inheritances often do, though?" Daniel observed. "They're not just about property or money. They're about values, priorities, how we honor the past while shaping the future." His words resonated with something Grandma Eleanor had once told me. What we leave behind is not just what we owned, but what we stood for. "Speaking of the future," Daniel said, shifting topics, "I wanted to discuss something with you. A proposition, actually." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his suddenly businesslike tone. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm expanding the firm's community outreach. We've always donated to preservation causes, but I want to create something more substantial. A foundation that would provide grants for historical restoration projects in underserved neighborhoods." "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "But what does it have to do with me?" Daniel looked slightly uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. "I was hoping you might consider directing it. Your marketing background would be perfect for raising awareness, and you have a genuine passion for preservation that can't be taught." I stared at him, taken aback. "You're offering me a job?" "A partnership, actually," he clarified. "You'd have significant autonomy and an ownership stake in the foundation. I've drawn up some preliminary plans." He handed me a folder I hadn't noticed him bring. "Take your time to consider it. There's no pressure." I opened the folder, scanning the detailed proposal inside. It was thoughtfully constructed, with a clear mission statement, financial projections, and even potential first-year projects. My mind raced with possibilities. This was an opportunity to do meaningful work that honored my grandmother's values while utilizing my professional skills in new ways. "Why me?" I asked finally, looking up from the papers. "You must know plenty of qualified people." Daniel held my gaze steadily. "Because in all my years in business, I've rarely met someone with your combination of integrity, intelligence, and genuine care for this community's heritage. Also," he added with a small smile, "because I enjoy working with you, and I think we'd make good partners." There was something in the way he said "partners" that suggested multiple meanings, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. "I'll think about it," I promised, closing the folder. "Good," he nodded, standing to leave. "That's all I ask." I watched him walk to his car. This man who had entered my life as a solution to a problem, but was quickly becoming something much more significant. For the first time in months, I felt not just at peace with my decisions, but excited about what might come next. Grandma Eleanor had given me more than a house. She had given me the courage to reimagine my life entirely. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Mom mentioned she saw you today. You okay?" I smiled at the simple gesture of concern. So different from the self-absorbed sister I'd known all my life. "I'm fine," I texted back. It was actually civil. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again as Vanessa composed her response. Finally, "They're slowly accepting reality. Dad even referred to Emily's house yesterday instead of Mom's house that Emily stole." I laughed out loud at this evidence of minimal progress. "The bar is on the floor, but I'll take it." Another pause, then. "I start working with Daniel's team officially on Monday. Nervous but excited." "You'll be great," I replied, meaning it. "Thanks," she texted, then added, "Good night, sis. Love you." Those 3 words, so casually, offered, caught me off guard. When had Vanessa last said she loved me? Had she ever? I couldn't remember. Yet here they were, glowing on my screen like small embers of a relationship being cautiously rekindled. "Love you too," I typed back, surprising myself with how true it felt. 3 months after Daniel's job offer, I found myself standing in what had once been my grandmother's parlor. Now, transformed into the elegant reception area of the Ruiz Historic Investments satellite office. The renovation had been completed with remarkable attention to detail. Original hardwood floors refinished to a warm glow, vintage light fixtures carefully rewired to meet modern safety standards, and crown molding meticulously restored to its former glory. Yet there were tasteful modern additions as, well, ergonomic furniture and colors that complemented the historical palette, state-of-the-art technology discreetly integrated into the century-old architecture, and artwork from local Austin artists that somehow bridged the gap between past and present. "What do you think?" Daniel asked, coming to stand beside me. "Ready for the grand opening tomorrow?" I nodded, taking in the space with a mixture of nostalgia and pride. "It's perfect. Grandma Eleanor would approve. It honors what was while creating something new. Much like you've done with your life these past months," he observed with a smile. I returned his smile, acknowledging the truth in his words. After careful consideration, I had accepted his proposal to direct the new Eleanor Carter Foundation for Historics Preservation, named, at his insistence, after my grandmother. The work was challenging and deeply satisfying, allowing me to combine my marketing skills with my newfound passion for preservation. In just 3 months, we had already secured funding for 2 restoration projects in East Austin and established a scholarship program for students pursuing studies in architecture and historic preservation. My personal life had undergone equally significant transformations. My relationship with Daniel had evolved from professional respect to genuine friendship to something more intimate, a development that had surprised us both with its natural progression and undeniable chemistry. We were taking things slowly, mindful of our business partnership and the complex circumstances that had brought us together, but there was no denying the growing connection between us. My relationship with my family remained complicated, but was gradually finding a new equilibrium. Vanessa had blossomed in her role at Austin Media Partners, earning a promotion to account manager after her successful handling of the Ruiz Investments campaign. Our sisterly bond, once defined by competition and resentment, had been replaced by something approaching genuine affection and mutual support. We met for dinner every other week, sharing stories from our increasingly divergent lives and slowly rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. My parents were a different matter. After our chance encounter at the restaurant, there had been a few more carefully civil interactions, a brief exchange at a community fundraiser, a strained 10-minute conversation when Vanessa insisted we all attend her birthday dinner. They had stopped actively trying to challenge my decisions or undermine my choices, but true reconciliation remained elusive. Until today. "Are you nervous about your parents coming to the opening?" Daniel asked, reading my thoughts with the intuition that had become familiar between us. I sighed, straightening a brochure on the reception desk. "A little. It's the first time they'll see the completed renovation, and the first time they'll really have to acknowledge that this is happening, that the house is now partially a business, that I'm working with you, that all their plans for selling it to benefit Vanessa are permanently off the table. We can still uninvite them," he offered, only half joking. I shook my head. "No, it's important that they come. Not for them, but for me. I need them to see that I've created something meaningful here, something Grandma would have valued." The grand opening was scheduled for the following evening, a reception for local business leaders, preservation advocates, and community members to celebrate both the new office space and the launch of the foundation. My parents had received an invitation along with everyone else, and Vanessa had confirmed they planned to attend, albeit reluctantly. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the coming confrontation. Would my parents cause a scene? Would they find fault with everything we'd done to the house? Or worse, would they simply act coldly, polite, maintaining the emotional distance that had characterized our relationship for months? I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs in my pajamas, wanting to take one last look at the space before it filled with guests the next day. The security system recognized me, automatically disarming as I entered, and I moved through the darkened rooms, illuminated only by the soft glow of emergency exit signs and the moonlight filtering through Grandma Eleanor's stained glass windows. In what had once been the dining room, and was now the main conference room, I paused before the wall where we'd hung a special display. Framed architectural drawings of the house from 1897, photographs of my grandmother and previous generations who had lived here, and at the center, a beautifully calligraphed quote from Grandma Eleanor. "The truest inheritance is not what we own, but what we choose to preserve." Tears pricked at my eyes as I gazed at her photograph. Eleanor at 60, standing proudly on this same porch. her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, her expression both kind and formidable. What would she think of all that had transpired since she'd left this house in my care? Would she approve of the path I'd chosen? "I hope I've made you proud," I whispered to her image. "She would be incredibly proud," came a voice from behind me, startling me so badly I nearly knocked over a nearby chair. I whirled around to find my mother standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. "Mom, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" I clutched at, my racing heart, trying to make sense of her unexpected appearance. "Vanessa gave me the security code," she admitted, stepping further into the room. "She said you sometimes have trouble sleeping before big events. I thought you might be down here." I stared at her, speechless. My mother had never sought me out like this, had never shown this kind of intuitive understanding of my habits or concerns. "I'm sorry to frighten you," she continued, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I can leave if you prefer." "No," I said quickly, my curiosity overriding my surprise. "It's okay, I'm just confused about why you're here at midnight before the opening." My mother moved closer, her gaze drifting to the wall display. "I wanted to see it, to really see it, without an audience, without your father's opinions influencing my reaction, without having to maintain appearances in front of business associates and neighbors." I watched her face as she studied the photographs, particularly the one of Grandma Eleanor. Her expression softened in a way I rarely witnessed, revealing the faint lines around her eyes and mouth that she usually concealed with expert makeup. "You look like her," my mother said quietly. "I never noticed it before, but you have her eyes, her determination." "Thank you," I said, unsure how to navigate this unfamiliar territory of maternal recognition. My mother turned to survey the room, taking in the careful blend of historical features and modern functionality. "You've done something remarkable here, Emily. It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She shrugged slightly, a gesture so casual it seemed out of character for her usually perfect composure. "Destruction, I suppose. That's what your father predicted. That this Daniel Ruiz would gut the place, remove all traces of our family history, turn it into some soulless modern office. But that's not what happened," I pointed out. "No," she acknowledged. "Instead, you've preserved everything that mattered while creating something new and purposeful. It's actually quite beautiful." The compliment hung in the air between us, perhaps the first genuine one she had offered me in years. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply waited, sensing she had more to say. My mother moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden where Grandma Eleanor's roses still bloomed, now tended by my own hands. I was jealous of her, my own mother. This confession, so unexpected and vulnerable, left me momentarily stunned. Jealous of Grandma? Why? "Because she connected with you in a way I never could," my mother said softly. "Because you would light up when she entered a room in a way you never did for me. Because she seemed to understand you effortlessly, while I always felt I was failing you somehow." I blinked back sudden tears. "I didn't know you felt that way." "How could you? I never showed it." She turned to face me, her expression more open than I had ever seen it. Instead, I focused on Vanessa, who was easier for me to understand, who responded to the things I valued: appearance, social graces, the right connections. And in doing so, I pushed you further away. I swallowed hard, overwhelmed by this sudden honesty after decades of emotional distance. "Why are you telling me this now?" My mother gestured around the room. "Because seeing what you've created here, how you've honored your grandmother's legacy while forging your own path, has forced me to recognize something I've been avoiding for months. Years, really." She took a deep breath. "You were never the problem, Emily. I was." The words I had longed to hear for most of my life now left me speechless. I leaned against the conference table for support, feeling as though the ground beneath me had suddenly shifted. "Your father still doesn't see it," she continued. "He's still angry that you defied his plans, still convinced that families should operate according to his rules. But watching Vanessa grow these past few months, becoming more independent, more confident in her own choices, has made me question everything we thought we were doing right." "Vanessa has changed," I agreed, finding my voice. "We both have." My mother nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "She told me last week that she's saving for her own place, a modest condo in South Austin, something she can afford on her salary without our help. She said," her voice caught slightly, "she said she wanted to be more like you, to build something that was truly hers." Pride and affection for my sister washed over me. She'll do it too. She's more capable than any of us gave her credit for. Yes, she is. My mother moved closer, hesitating before asking, "Would it be all right if I hugged you, Emily? I understand if you don't want me to." The request, so vulnerable and uncertain, broke something loose inside me. Without thinking, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her slim frame. She stiffened momentarily, then melted into the embrace, holding me with a fierceness that spoke of years of missed connections. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against my hair. "I'm so sorry for everything." We stood like that for a long moment, mother and daughter finding a new way to exist together in the moonlit room that had once been my grandmother's domain. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. "Will Dad ever come around?" I asked when we finally separated, both discreetly wiping away tears. My mother sighed. "I don't know. He's stubborn and he hates being wrong. But seeing this place tomorrow, seeing what you've accomplished, might start to change his perspective. And if not," she squared her shoulders slightly, "then that will be his loss, not yours." As she turned to leave, she paused at the wall display once more, her fingers lightly touching the frame of Grandma Eleanor's photograph. "She knew exactly what she was doing when she left you this house. She saw your strength long before any of us did." After she'd gone, I remained in the conference room for a while longer, processing what had just occurred. My mother's midnight visit had been something I couldn't have imagined just months ago. An acknowledgement of fault, an apology, a tentative step toward healing. It wasn't everything, but it was more than I had dared to hope for. When I finally returned to my apartment upstairs, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, my dreams filled not with anxiety about the coming day, but with images of 3 generations of women, my grandmother, my mother, and myself, each finding her own way to preserve what mattered most. The evening of the grand opening arrived with perfect fall weather, a crisp 68 degrees, clear skies, and just enough breeze to make the fairy lights strung across the porch dance invitingly. Catering staff moved efficiently through the first floor, arranging appetizer trays and setting up the bar in what had once been Grandma Eleanor's kitchen. A string quartet was setting up in the corner of the main reception area, tuning their instruments with quiet precision. I stood in my bedroom upstairs, putting the finishing touches on my appearance. I had chosen a dark green silk dress that complemented my eyes, paired with a simple silver pendant necklace that had been my grandmother's. My hair was swept into an elegant updo, and I had applied makeup with more care than usual, wanting to project confidence and professionalism for this important event. A soft knock at my door announced Vanessa's arrival. She entered with a flutter of excitement, resplendent in a navy blue cocktail dress, her hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. "You look amazing," she declared, giving me a quick hug. "Very CEO meets preservation goddess." I laughed, grateful for her presence. "Thanks. You look stunning too. How are things downstairs?" "Everything's perfect." Daniel is in full charming host mode, greeting the early arrivals. The mayor just pulled up, and there's already a cluster of historic preservation board members admiring the woodwork in the library. I mean, collaborative workspace, she corrected herself with a grin. "And Mom and Dad?" I asked hesitantly. Vanessa's expression softened. "They're coming. Mom texted me 20 minutes ago that they were leaving the house." She paused, studying me. "Are you okay with seeing Dad? Mom mentioned she stopped by last night." I nodded, adjusting my necklace. "I'm nervous, but it's time. Whatever happens, happens." "That's very zen of you," Vanessa observed. "A year ago, you would have been a bundle of anxiety, trying to please everyone. A year ago, I was a different person," I said simply. We descended the stairs together to find the event in full swing. At least 50 people had already arrived, creating a pleasant buzz of conversation that filled the historic rooms. Daniel spotted us immediately and made his way through the crowd, looking handsome and distinguished in a charcoal suit. "There she is," he said warmly, taking my hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "The woman of the hour. Ready to officially launch your foundation?" "Our foundation," I corrected him with a smile. "And yes, I'm ready." For the next hour, I circulated through the rooms, explaining the foundation's mission to potential donors, pointing out original architectural features we'd preserved, and accepting congratulations from community members who remembered my grandmother fondly. It was exhilarating to see how many people appreciated what we'd created, not just a beautiful office space, but a commitment to preserving Austin's architectural heritage for future generations. I was in the middle of discussing a potential restoration project with a city council member when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find my father standing there, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire, my mother at his side. "Emily," he said stiffly, "congratulations on your event." "Thank you for coming," I replied, excusing myself from the previous conversation. "I appreciate it." An awkward silence fell between us. My mother gave my father a pointed look, which he deliberately ignored. "The place looks different," he finally offered. "But still beautiful," my mother interjected quickly. "They've done a remarkable job preserving the character while making it functional." My father grunted non-committally, his gaze sweeping the room with the critical eye of a real estate developer. I steeled myself for criticism, for some cutting remark about wasted space or outdated features, but instead he surprised me. "Your grandmother would have approved," he said gruffly. "She always said this place had good bones." Coming from my father, this was high praise indeed. I felt something tight within me loosen slightly. "She did say that," I agreed. "Often." My father shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional undertone of our exchange. "Well, the mayor seems impressed. That should help with zoning if you ever want to expand." Always the businessman, turning even a moment of connection back to practical concerns. But I recognized this for what it was. His way of acknowledging the legitimacy of what I'd built, the only language he really knew for expressing approval. "Thank you, Dad," I said sincerely. Before he could respond, Daniel approached, extending his hand. "Thomas, Catherine, thank you for joining us tonight." My father hesitated for a fraction of a second before accepting the handshake. "Ruiz, nice place you've got here." "We think so," Daniel replied easily, including me in his gesture. Though much of the credit goes to Emily. She's been instrumental in ensuring we honored the home's heritage. My father's expression tightened at the reminder of my partnership with Daniel, but he maintained his composure. "Yes, well, she's always been stubborn about getting her way. I prefer to call it principled," my mother said lightly, giving me a small smile. A quality she shares with her grandmother. Before my father could retort, the soft chime of a glass being tapped called everyone's attention to the center of the room, where Vanessa stood, poised and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," she called out, her voice clear and confident. "As the communications director for this project, it's my pleasure to officially welcome you to the grand opening of the Ruiz Historic Investments Satellite Office and the launch of the Eleanor Carter Foundation for Historic Preservation." A round of applause followed, and I felt a surge of pride seeing my sister in her element. No longer the pampered princess, but a capable professional commanding respect on her own merits. "I'd like to invite Emily Carter, the Foundation's director, to say a few words," Vanessa continued, gesturing toward me with a warm smile. As I moved to the center of the room, I caught Daniel's encouraging nod, my mother's proud gaze, and even a grudging look of interest from my father. The crowd quieted, expectantly, and I took a deep breath, finding my center. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. "Many of you knew my grandmother, Eleanor Carter, whose home this was for over 50 years. She was a woman who understood that true preservation isn't about freezing the past in amber, but about carrying forward what matters, while allowing for growth and change." I gestured to the space around us. "That's what we've tried to do here, to honor the history of this beautiful Victorian home, while giving it new purpose and new life. The Eleanor Carter Foundation will extend that vision throughout our community, focusing on historically underserved neighborhoods where architectural treasures are at risk of being lost forever." As I outlined our plans for grants, educational programs, and community engagement, I felt a sense of rightness, of standing exactly where I was meant to be. This was the inheritance my grandmother had truly left me, not just the physical structure of the house, but the courage to transform it into something meaningful, something larger than myself. My grandmother once told me that the difference between a house and a home is that a home tells a story. I concluded, looking around at the gathered faces. This place has told many stories over its 125 years, and thanks to all of you, it will continue to do so for generations to come. Thank you for being part of its newest chapter. The applause was genuine and heartfelt. As people raised their glasses in a toast, I caught sight of my family, my mother wiping away a discreet tear, my father nodding. With reluctant respect, Vanessa beaming with undisguised pride. Whatever ruptures had occurred between us, whatever pain we had caused each other, We were finding our way to something new. Not the automatic closeness of family taken for granted, but the earned connection of adults choosing to see and respect each other. Later, as the event began to wind down and guests started to depart, I found myself alone on the porch swing, taking a moment of quiet after hours of socializing. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of Grandma Eleanor's roses from the garden below. Daniel found me there, sitting down beside me and gently setting the swing in motion. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder, just thinking about journeys. How sometimes the path you think you're on turns out to be completely different from where you actually end up. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "Not one," I replied honestly. "A year ago, I never could have imagined this. Running a foundation, standing up to my family, finding my own voice. It would have seemed impossible. And yet, here you are," he observed, his arms settling comfortably around my shoulders. Doing the impossible rather spectacularly, I might add. From inside, we could hear the last of the guests saying their goodbyes. My father's distinctive laugh drifted out, a sound I hadn't heard in my presence for months. Vanessa's voice followed, describing some project they were collaborating on. My mother appeared in the doorway, spotted us on the swing, and gave me a small, understanding smile before discreetly stepping back inside. "My family is still a work in progress," I acknowledged. "But for the first time in my life, I feel like we might eventually find a way to relate to each other as equals, not as roles in some prescribed family drama." "That's no small achievement," Daniel said. "Rewriting family dynamics is harder than restoring a 100-year-old house. Both require patience, careful attention to foundations, and knowing which parts can be changed and which need to be preserved," I observed, making him chuckle. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the swing creaking gently beneath us, the fairy lights casting a warm glow over the porch. In the distance, the Austin skyline glittered against the night sky, modern towers rising alongside, historic structures in the visual representation of the balance we were trying to achieve. "What's next?" Daniel asked eventually. "For the foundation? For this place? For us?" I turned to face him, taking in the features that had become dear to me over these transformative months. His thoughtful eyes, the slight curve of his mouth, the way he looked at me as though truly seeing me. "For the, foundation, expansion into more neighborhoods, more projects. For this place, perhaps a community lecture series on preservation techniques." I paused, my hand finding his. "For us, I'm open to possibilities." His smile widened. "I like possibilities," he said, leaning in to kiss me softly. When we separated, I gazed at the house that had started it all, Grandma Eleanor's legacy, now transformed, but still standing strong. What had begun as a battle over an inheritance had become something far more valuable. A journey of self-discovery, of finding my voice, of building relationships based on respect rather than obligation. "For years, they told me family meant sacrifice," I said quietly, watching as Vanessa escorted our parents to their car, the three of them talking with an ease I hadn't witnessed in years. "But real family doesn't demand you give up everything to feed their selfishness. Real family leaves you with love, not ultimatums. In the end, the house wasn't my revenge. It was my protection. And with it, I finally learned that choosing myself doesn't make me selfish. It makes me free." Daniel squeezed my hand in understanding. Inside, the house that had sheltered generations of my family now hummed with new purpose, new energy, new possibilities, much like the woman I had become in its embrace. The inheritance my grandmother had left me wasn't just a structure of wood and stone. It was the courage to build a life that honored both her legacy and my own truth. And sitting there in the gentle Texas night, surrounded by the past I had preserved and the future I was creating, I knew with absolute certainty that Grandma Eleanor was smiling.